Welcome to the Unlist. Today I want to talk about a concept that's really more of a fragrance community concept than a real world concept. Even though it is mentioned in the real world in fragrance marketing, so it's not something that would be alien to the casual fragrance user, but it is a concept that is far more important, or at least discussed far more among enthusiasts, collectors, fragcom, if you will, than the average person. And that concept is the signature fragrance. Whether or not someone should have a signature fragrance versus having a small rotating collection of fragrances that they use for different situations, or should someone be a full-blown collector and have dozens, if not hundreds, or in some extreme cases, thousands of different fragrances from which to choose for day use, night use, hot, cold, or just the absolute perfume connoisseur purist that says, I wear whatever I want, whenever I want, context be damned. So all of these things are kind of at war with each other. And yes, I'm holding a can of soda, I don't care. So let's talk about it. For me personally, I find that most people who have a signature fragrance are actually, pardon me there, let me start that over again. I find that most people who have a signature fragrance are actually not always consciously aware that they have a signature fragrance. It's like they just have a fragrance that they wear because that's what they like. And they may not even wear it every day. They may just wear it occasionally when they go out, or sometimes they just put a little on when they go to the office. They might not wear it on weekends, for example. Or it just could be the daily thing that they spray themselves with. Could be a can of Axe, or Lynx if you're in Europe. It doesn't really matter. To them, it's not so serious, and it's not so defined as, yes, this is the thing I want to be known for wearing. This is the thing that I want people to recognize in the air. No, it's my trail, it's my sillage, it's my signature. Like it's not that serious, guys. Most folks, including my father, who I will tell a story about in just a second, but people like my father technically checked all the boxes for having a signature fragrance. But if he were alive today and you were to ask him, hey Dad, is this your signature fragrance? He would go, I guess it's what I wear, right? He would probably answer the question with a question. He'd be like, this is what I wear, so does that make this a signature fragrance for me because this is what I wear? So that's how he would bounce it back at you. He'd be like, okay, well, I mean, I guess, is that what, if you wear a fragrance you like on a regular basis, does that make it a signature? That's how he'd probably answer that question with a question. So you see where I'm going at with this discussion already, is that the concept of having to go out and find that one fragrance that communicates to the world that this is you. It's not an invalid quest to have if you really want to go on that quest for the Holy Grail. If you want to go look for the golden fleece alongside the rest of your Argonaut buddies, just watch out for the Hydra, okay? And these little teeth that turn into skeleton soldiers. They're stop motion animation, so they're like, really clinky looking soldiers. But anyhow, that's something you can do. You're allowed to do that, okay? But just be aware that if you put that much importance behind having a fragrance that is truly uniquely yours, you're almost left with no choice but to create one yourself. You see, that's the ultimate form of signature fragrance, is a bespoke fragrance. And I feel like maybe some of the people in the fragrance community don't realize that. They don't put the two and the two together, or they're coming back with 5 or something, I don't know. But they don't realize that it's virtually impossible to have a true signature from anything made commercially. You can have a particularly rare artisanal fragrance, like one of the early slumber house fragrances that only one batch of was made, and they now sell for like $3,000 on eBay because there were maybe 100 bottles of it made total. Something like that could, for all intents and purposes, be a signature, because you're probably not going to run into another person in your entire life wearing that, unless you go to a slumber house fan meeting or something, if those exist, like a slumber house meetup. But or you could do it with Arise L'Adore and other brands like that that produce very tiny numbers of fragrances, or do one and dones and that's it. But anything that's at least on the luxury level and on down, so luxury, niche, any of that stuff, and definitely not designers. Definitely not designers. I mean, some really old designers that are long discontinued, and like, again, you may never run into another person who actually wears that fragrance except for another collector who does those vintages like you do. So again, it could work as your signature if you're able to source enough of it, being that it's discontinued. But don't ever go to a meetup. Don't go to a Base Notes meetup or something where other vintage enthusiasts are going to gather, because then someone else is probably going to be wearing what you're wearing, and you're going to be like, oh, no, it's not my signature anymore. Oh no. You know, so that's kind of what happens. And that's why I say it's okay to have your favorites. It's okay to have your daily drivers. It's okay to have the things that you wail on the most, you beat on the most, You beat on it like it owes you money, okay? You drain that bottle down and you replace it. It's okay to have those, But to call any of those your signature fragrance, unless you give up all other fragrances and wear just that, and unless you don't know anybody else in your neighborhood, in your family, among your coworkers who wears that fragrance, then it's not truly a signature fragrance, is it? The only route you can logically take, therefore, is something either exceedingly rare, like what I already mentioned, or something that is made just for you. You reach out to a perfumer. I know a couple who do bespokes. Okay? I will name drop them. You can go look them up if you want to. But Darren Allen Perfumes works out of Pittsburgh. He does bespokes. I think Vareo Perfumes does bespokes, so you can look her up. Vareo does bespokes, and there are a handful of others that will do them. I'm not sure if Merrimental does bespokes. They might. You can check them out. But there are a handful of them that do, and they're not cheap, because they're making a product just for you that they cannot reproduce for anyone else. They cannot scale up volume for. They're literally just having a formula that they spend time and money and ingredients on to develop, just so they can sell you one bottle and maybe a lifetime supply of said bottle. So that becomes a very expensive game, because it's just for you, unless you choose to let them release it to the public. And sometimes that happens. I mean, clearly, Blend and Bouquet by Penhaligon's was originally bespoke fragrance for the Duke of Marlborough, ended up being sold to everybody. Okay, so those things do happen, but it's not super common. So, truly want a signature fragrance, you probably want a bespoke fragrance. Or again, something exceedingly rare, like those Roja Dove semi-bespokes that he created early on when he first launched his house. They're not truly bespoke because they were made in volume, but he jokingly refers to them as semi-bespoke because, again, only a few hundred bottles of each were made. So you're not likely to run across anyone else who's wearing that. But back on point, I feel like the concept of the signature fragrance is one born of nostalgia. So we look back at our fathers, and we look back at our grandfathers, and like with my story of my dad, which I will tell you at the end of this video, we look back upon these people, and we see how they lived the majority of their adult life wearing one fragrance. And we see that they were resolute in wearing that fragrance. So then we develop this sort of romanticized view of our fathers and grandfathers wearing these fragrances and going, well, that was their signature fragrance, because when Uncle Chuck always came over for Christmas doused in English leather, and you were a little sprout and didn't know anyone else in your family who wore English leather, that was like his signature to you, you know, or cousin Paul or whoever who always wore Brute, always came over every backyard cookout you guys ever had, every pool party you guys ever had, every family reunion, and the place was reeked of Brute while he walked through it. So, and you didn't know anyone else, again, didn't know anyone else who wore that. And this is also a game that it can be played by women as well. I don't want to lock the ladies out of the conversation. This is mostly a male phenomenon I find in the community, the fragrance community. But in the real world, there are definitely a lot of women who only wear one fragrance. We all had aunts, and we all had grandmothers, and other matrons in our family. Maybe we had a sister. My sister loved Gloria Vanderbilt, and even though she wore other perfumes, she mostly wore Gloria Vanderbilt. To this day, if you ask her what her favorite fragrance is, she will tell you it's Gloria Vanderbilt. So that's what I mean. The signature concept in the real world is much less of a big deal, okay? It's not so serious. Women did it, men did it, you know? Everyone who didn't think beyond owning a single perfume, and that's the big takeaway here, people. Everyone out there in the real world who didn't think beyond owning a single fragrance ended up making that fragrance by default their signature, because it's all they wore, and they probably replaced it a couple of times. And eventually they might get sick of it, you know. There are people I know who had fathers and grandfathers who wore Brute for like 20 years, and then once that got a little hard to find, they said, okay, now I'm going to wear Drakkar. And they wore Drakkar for another 20 years. So then when you go and apply this signature logic of, well, which one was my uncle's signature, because he wore Brute in the 60s and 70s, and then in the 80s and 90s he wore Drakkar. So you can't say both, can you? Because the very concept of a signature fragrance is you can only have one. So you're like, well, this was his signature, and then this one was. And if your uncle was still alive, or cousin or whoever, he may have 4 perfumes now. Because that also tends to happen, is people who wear fragrances long enough tend to accumulate more than one. And sometimes they get out of the habit of wearing one fragrance and they start wearing all the things that they have. I've known plenty of people who only had one fragrance and then ended up with 4 or 5. My roommate started off wearing only one specific fragrance. And then because he's around me and I'm the big perfume guy, right? Talk him into trying this, trying that, you know, letting him smell stuff out of my collection. Now he has like 8 fragrances. He had 1 when he met me. Now he has like 8. And he'll probably end up with 9 before it's all too long. And then eventually 10, because the sickness just spreads. Okay? So that happens too. Now let's get back to my father, the story I want to end this video with. It's not a super long video, guys. Maybe it's going to crack 20 minutes. I don't know. We're not there yet. So if it does, then all right, it does. My dad, for the majority of his adult life, wore Old Spice. He was born in 1939, 2 years after Old Spice was launched, okay? He was a teenager during the Korean conflict. He was drafted, but he served as National Guard teenager, so he never got sent over to Korea, okay? But he was in the military during that conflict. Too old for Vietnam. He was, you know, past that, served his time, got out already. They didn't tend to redraft you a second time. They could recall you back in some rare circumstances, but my dad never really moved that far up into the military. So I guess they didn't use foot soldiers twice. I don't know. You can ask military folks about that, but he did his time. He was a reservist after he got out, so he remained that for a little while. But he took up a trade, became an electrician, and his entire adult life, most of his money was made by doing electrical work. Residential at first, and then once I stopped making enough money, he moved into contract work after that and did construction. Ended up being more lucrative before he retired from that. So his economic situation improved throughout his life until later years, but I don't want to make this a dark story, so we're not going to talk about that. However, he always wore Old Spice. And it wasn't like he didn't have money to buy other things, because he bought my mother whatever perfumes she wanted. So she wanted Chanel No. 5, she got it, okay? She wanted anything Revlon, anything Estee Lauder, anything Elizabeth Arden. she got it. She didn't have too many high-end designers. She didn't have Hermes. She didn't have Dior. She didn't have Yves Saint Laurent. But she also didn't have a taste for those either. She really only wanted Chanel. Chanel was like the apple of her eye. So it was number 5 for her. That was her. Arguably, if you want to give my mother a signature, you could say it was number 5. That was what she wore. And a lot of women from that generation. You know, my mom was born in 55, a little bit younger than my dad. She wore number 5. But she also wore like 24 other things because she had Jean Two, she had Charlie, she had all these other perfumes. She had tons of Avon, okay? She had things that I don't even remember, like Moon Drops, stuff like that, okay? She had Prince Machiavelli's. She had Charles of the Ritz's. She had Elizabeth Arden's. She eventually wore Sunflowers in the 90s when that came out, so she liked that a whole lot. Okay, my dad, he never bought anything else for himself but Old Spice. He was bought other things. Sometimes he was bought other things with his own money because my mother had his credit cards. Of course, this was the 80s, right? Mother had his credit card, so my mother would buy him other things. He had a lot of Menon products because, you know, he shaved. So my mom went, okay, well, you like Skin Bracer, so let me go buy you some other things that Menon. At the time, Menon had fragrances. Menon doesn't really do fragrances now, but they had fragrances back then. And he had Hawk, which was a Menon cologne. He had Millionaire, which was another Menon fragrance. And then he also had a bunch of Avons because my mother sold Avon on the side. So he had like a small boudoir, just like she did, full of colognes. You know, he must have had like 15 of them. Did he ever wear any of them though? At all? Nope. Nope, they sat there. I remember because I was a kid and I used to go in my parents' bedroom because they had their own bathroom. They had a master bedroom with a separate bathroom. And my mother would let me shower in their shower because we had 3 brothers in my house. 3 adult brothers who were all grown up, and they would kind of run riot on that bathroom, the main bathroom, so it was never open. So, you know, little old me, little dork me, you know, gotta go take a shower, gotta get ready for school tomorrow. Just scoot me on into the master bedroom and I could use their shower. So I would walk past all those colognes and perfumes growing up. And sometimes I would stop and look at him and sniff him and do what little kids do. And I knew he had completely full bottles of these fragrances, guys. These are things that will probably now fetch a little bit of money on eBay, especially the Menon stuff that's all discontinued, long gone. But completely full bottles. And it used to make me wonder why they were full. Like, why does Dad not wear these? And my mom just kind of went like this. Like, I buy these things for him. He smells it. He might wear it one time, you know, on Christmas because it's new. He might wear it once to anniversary dinner or whatever, and then that's it. It sits. It's just Old Spice, Old Spice, Old Spice. And even when he passed away in 2008, he was still just wearing Old Spice. So packaging had changed a little bit, clearly, by then. I have his last bottle that he owned, which was circa the 90s. He didn't go through a bottle very quickly because he did what a lot of old guys do. You remember a lot of old guys back then would just be like that, and then that's it. They didn't do this or this or this. They just kind of went, they pulled a little stopper out and they went, okay, all right, that's enough. I smell good. I'm done. Like that. Well, that's what he did. So it took him a dog's age to go through a bottle of Old Spice. So the bottle he passed away with in 2008 was like from the 90s. So it was already like 10 years old, 15 years old by then. And it's what I have now. And I don't think he was ever consciously aware that Old Spice was his signature. And I don't think anybody around him, because none of us were frag heads, okay? None of us were collectors. We didn't sling these terms around, okay? We didn't go around saying, oh yeah, that's Dad's signature, man. That's his signature fragrance. He always wore Old Spice. That was his signature. That's what I remember him wearing. That was his fragrance and only his fragrance. We just didn't cross our mind. So there you go, guys. That's my discussion on signature fragrances. And I will let you decide what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Have a good one.